We would love to just say hello to you. We don't have to raise your hand or anything, so we just want to say hello because I know that we have some. All right, let's get into this. If you have your Bible, go ahead and open up to Luke chapter 10, verses 17 to 14. We're going old school today, so no things on the slide. We're going to go whiteboard. This is, for the youngins, you're like, what in the world is this? It's called a whiteboard. Luke chapter 10, verses 17 through 24. If you have your phones with you, go ahead and you can pull it up on your phones. I'll also read it for you. Luke chapter 10, 17 through 24. As usual, I'm reading in the NASB, but most of your translations should just be okay. Be just fine. Luke chapter 10, verse 17 to 24. And if you have it pulled up, I invite you to read along with me. Let's read God's word together, shall we? The 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. Then he said to them, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven. And at that very time he rejoiced greatly in the Holy Spirit and said, I praise you, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent, and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and anyone whom the Son wills to reveal him. Turning to the disciples, he said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things you see, for I say to you that many prophets and kings wish to see things which you see, did not see them, and to hear things which you hear, and did not hear them. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What do you feel, or what do you think when you read a passage like this? Does it captivate your attention? Is it fascinating to you? Or perhaps is it just confusing to you? Are you drawn to passages like this when you read them? Or honestly, are you turned off by them? Or are you in the boat where you're saying, you know what, I'm a little confused, I don't know what's going on, and so you just kind of quietly move on. Why? Because it's difficult to understand. Now, I ask these questions because passages like this one, I think the point of them and what Jesus is doing is to try to make us rethink what we think we know about Jesus. To rethink how we understand Jesus, what we think he's like, and so on and so forth. That no matter how we understand Jesus to be, and there's sure a lot of different ways to understand him. Some of us maybe grew up thinking that Jesus was kind of like fluffy unicorn type. He's soft, he's kind, he's gentle, he's always nice all the time. Some of us like to imagine him as a warrior, the type who flips over tables and tells people that they need to do better, so on and so forth. But no matter how you envision him, passages like this one challenges us to rethink what we think we know. And on the heels of the fact that last week we looked at the transfiguration, which is when Peter is forced to rethink what he thinks he knows about Jesus and what he knows, this passage continues along that theme. Here's a quick summary of what just happened. Jesus sends out the 70 to go into the harvest while the workers are few, and they go out and they do great work. They come back and they're ecstatic, they're joyful. Why? Because they say, even the demons are subject to us in your name, Jesus. The disciples were sent out and they were able to drive out demons and heal people, do the things that most often only Jesus is able to do. It's a reason to be excited, and we can understand they should be excited. Kind of reminds me of a story long time ago. I think it was my cousin, maybe it was me, but we were in California visiting one of our aunts, and she had a couple of dogs, and one of the dogs was named Coco. It was a golden retriever, beautiful. And we were like 3 or 4 or whatever. And so they told us that if you tell Coco to sit down, that he would sit down. And we thought it was like the coolest thing. Like you could tell this dog to sit down, he would sit down. So of course we, being 3 or 4, would walk outside, and Coco's doing them. We'd be like, Coco, come here. And we'd be like, Coco, sit down. And then of course Coco sat down. And I think it was me. I went crazy. I was like, what in the world? So I ran back in the house, and I went to my aunt, and I said in Korean, I said, Coco, sit down, Coco, sit down, like that. I told Coco to sit down, and then he sat down. It's classic, Mom, Dad, look what I can do, right? This is what essentially the disciples are doing. Jesus, look at what we just did. But Jesus' response is not what we would expect or hope for, it seems. Listen to what he says. He goes, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. When we're like, what? What does that have to do with anything? Behold, I've given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the powers of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. AKA, here's the reason why you're able to do the things that you just did. But nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven. Where's the good job? Where's the congratulations in Korean, 잘했어? Like, where is the appreciation? That's what we would expect. And not only does Jesus not encourage them or affirm them, doesn't he even seem to minimize what they've done and then even further take credit for why they did what they did? In the Coco sit down example, it'd be like me going into my aunt and be like, hey, 고모, like my auntie, Coco sat down when I told him to sit down. And she goes, yeah, you know why? Because I paid for the dog training so that you could do so. And you should be thankful. Not that you could tell him to sit down, but that you have a dog to call in the first place. Now, I'm not saying that's what Jesus is saying, but in many ways, that's what it sounds like, doesn't it? So then we have to ask, what is he saying? Why does he respond this way? And as I said, we're following up the transfiguration from last week, but this passage, the reason why I think it was appropriate is it actually follows the transfiguration scene in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 9:28 is when Jesus is transfigured, and I think what the passage is asking us to do is to rethink something that's very foundational to the gospel, grace, and salvation, all of it to us, that perhaps we might not understand it the way that we think we understand it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about it in 3 headings, 3 points. Sorry I don't have it on the screen or it's not on the board. 1, what salvation is not. You can replace salvation with the gospel, grace, what it is not. What salvation is, number 2. And 3, how we know we have it. Okay? How we know we have it, or if we don't have it, how we get it. First, what salvation is not. A famous pastor by the name of Dr. Lloyd Jones gave this illustration in a sermon he once preached. He said that he would go around and ask people, right? Christians and other people in the church and other people. He would say, are you a Christian? And he said many people responded like this, well, I'm trying to be. Right? I'm trying my best here. And what Dr. Lloyd Jones said in the sermon was, anytime somebody would respond like that, well, I'm trying to be, what it meant to him and what it signaled to him was that person didn't know much anything about Christianity. Now, he says this is the reason was because when someone says, I'm trying to be, what they're saying is, yes, I am, but I'm not that good of a Christian, right? I was having a conversation with someone recently about certain things. They were having questions about their faith and also trying to tell their faith to their friends. And as they were describing the story, in the conversation, they kept on saying this. I know I'm not the best Christian right now, but I believe so and so and so, and so I want to kind of do this and this and that. I know I'm not the best Christian right now, but I'm trying this. I know I'm not the best Christian right now, so on and so forth. And this happens in a lot of conversations we have with Christians. Now, if you think that Dr. Lloyd Jones' assessment of that response is a little harsh, let's think about what he's saying and why he's saying it. To say that I'm trying or that I'm not as good of a Christian as I want to be is, for Dr. Lloyd Jones, and I also agree, is the sign that the person who's saying this has misunderstood the fundamental nature of the gospel itself and therefore salvation. It means to that person that there is indeed such a thing as a good Christian versus a bad one. And if you're like, yeah, duh, not so fast. According to the gospel, there's no such thing as a good Christian or a bad Christian. You either are Christian or you're not Christian. There's only 2 distinctions, period. You see, every other religion in the world, the ones that I've studied, and also a lot of people smarter than me who've studied actually all of them, it seems, what they say is that every other religion in the world works along these lines. They have a linear line, and you basically start from bad, and then you go to okay, and then good, and then better, right? And then so on and so forth. That's how every other religion works. But Christianity is the only religion that does not work along these lines. Let me explain a little bit. First, by giving you a context of what's happening here with the disciples. If you flip back to chapter 9, verse 28, I told you it's the transfiguration, right? Now, we're going to trace what the disciples are doing, and it's quite the journey. Just imagine yourselves in their shoes of what's happening, okay? So Peter, James, and John are taken up to a mountain, and they see Jesus transfigured. We talked about that last week. And then on their way down from the mountain, there is a massive crowd that's formed at the bottom of the mountain. Why? Because there's a father who has a son who's demon-possessed. And of course, as a father would, he wants the demon to be out of his son. And so then he asks the disciples of Jesus, hey, can you cast out this demon for me? Because my son is really, really hurting right now. But they're not able to do so. And so then when Jesus comes down, the Father runs up to Jesus and say, hey, your disciples weren't able to do it. Can you cast out this demon for me? And so Jesus indeed does. But he has some choice words for the disciples. He calls them, you unbelieving and perverted generation, which is interesting. And then when he's done, everyone is marveling at what he's done. And then Jesus, as we said last time, starts to talk about his death and resurrection again. And then right after this, then Luke tells us that the disciples then get into an argument about who is the greatest among them. And because Jesus sees what's going on, what he does is he takes a little child. During first service, Dan and Becky's 4 little kids were in service. It was actually great. I was talking about them the whole time. But he brings one of the little children next to him, right? And he goes, and he says this, whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and who receives me receives my Father, because the one who is least among you is the one who is great. So he's basically saying, stop arguing about those things. And then the story goes, and the disciples, then they're walking along their way to Jerusalem, and then one of the disciples goes, Jesus, we're noticing that there are these people who aren't a part of our crew, but they're going out casting demons out in your name. Track, they weren't able to do demons. They were then able to do demons. In the middle, they get mad about other people who were able to cast out demons. Are you seeing? And they go, should we reprimand them and tell them that they're not allowed to do so? And Jesus goes, no. If they're not against us, they're for us, they're okay. Sounds like sour grapes from the disciples quite a bit, doesn't it? And then it gets even worse. Then James and John, right afterwards, the two who are on the mountain other than Peter, again, they're on their journey, and they realize that people, as they go into villages, they're not going to always receive them. And do you know what they say? Jesus, whenever we go into these villages, there are people who are not going to receive us. And then they go, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? Hey, Jesus, I have a good idea. Whenever we go into a village and people don't like us, let's ask God to send fire down from heaven and burn them all to pieces. And then Jesus goes, you do not know what kind of spirit you are speaking of, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. It's like, whoa. Then Jesus teaches them about what it means to be a disciple, right? The foxes have holes, but the Son of Man is homeless idea. That following Jesus, right, you have to do so before burying your dead and so on and so forth. And then after all of this, then Jesus sends out the 70, but he sends them out in verse 3 of chapter 10 as lambs in the midst of wolves, which is not a good thing because lambs in the midst of wolves, they die. It's a feeding frenzy. But he sends them out anyway, and they go out, and they're actually able to do good things, cast out demons and heal. So they come back, and they're super stoked. Why? Because finally they got something right. And not just anything right, they got the demons casting out thing right. But as we read, Jesus then ruins the mood, party pooper, and he's like, hey, calm down, chill out. It's not that big of a deal. Now let's get back to the other religions of the world and how this all relates. As I said, every religion in the world works differently than Christianity. And here's the best way to explain it. Have you ever seen this bridge analogy? You may have seen it. This is us. I only draw stick figures because I can't draw, right? And then this is God or heaven or something along those lines, right? Nirvana, whatever the religion is, the end goal, okay? Now here's what every religion tells you is the way it's supposed to work. The way that life works is like this. You're supposed to build a bridge so you can get from one side to the other. That's duh, that makes sense, right? Can you, over here people, can you see? Sorry. At 9 o'clock there were less people, right? And so here's how the world tells you need to then traverse, get across this bridge, okay? You gotta build a bridge, and here's how you bridge. You first build a pylon, okay? And then you take materials and then you start to build little bits and pieces, and you link them all together. And then you get here, and you're like, one part done. Then if you can get over here, then you build another pylon, and then you build some more, little by little, and you're, right? Now you're here, right? And then build some more, and then so on and so forth. That's how you're supposed to do it. Now, the idea is pretty simple. The further you get along this bridge, the better you are at whatever you're trying to do. If you're a Christian, you're a better Christian. If you're a Buddhist, you're a better Buddhist. Whatever it is, you're trying to get further. And in the Christian faith, we actually think this, right? These are the people who read their Bibles every day or, pray every day. And then over here, these are like the praise team leaders and then, other people who serve. And then as you go, you get more titles and you have all these things. This is how we think of things. The further you go, the better you are. And this is exactly what the disciples are doing, isn't it? They're arguing about greatness. Who's over here on the bridge and who's over here? Who's the greatest? Who can do the things that other people can't do? Who can cast out demons, so on and so forth? I'm going to guess that the greatest among them had to at least prerequisite be able to cast out demons, right? Because that's kind of the thing that's going on here. But this isn't how Christianity works. It's actually quite dangerous because it twists how we understand salvation and faith. Because if you subscribe to this idea, what it means is that you are trying to save yourself. Why? Because you can't make it to the end unless you build that bridge, see? And it means that our value as who we are as human beings is how far along the bridge you are. Our worth is wrapped up in how well we've done and how well we are doing. And therefore, your worth determines whether you're saved or not in your eyes, whether you are good or not, etc. And throughout Scripture, Jesus tries to make plainly clear that these things are not what he's looking for. The classic example is in Matthew 7. I'll read it for you. Matthew 7, 21 to 23. He says this. You know this passage, I'm pretty sure. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I, Jesus, will declare to you, I never knew you. Depart from me, you practice lawlessness. On the heels of the disciples going out into the harvest, having been able to do wonderful things, casting out demons and healing people, he tells them, do not put your weight in that. Do not put your worth in that. Do not think that you're doing well because you did those things. Do not think that that tells me where you're supposed to be or how well you are doing. Be this and be that is not what I'm talking about. I do not care about being good or being better or being great or not so good. That's not what the gospel is. This is not salvation. The way that I picture it in our lives is I think we think that what we want to do is to kind of build this bridge and get to like 90%. And then the rest of it, Jesus will do. That's not how this works. So that's not what salvation is. Then what is it? Well, hear Jesus' words again in Luke chapter 10, right? He says, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Now, we don't have time to get into the full nature of this, but for today, here's what it means. Satan, Jesus is saying, has been defeated. I was watching him fall from heaven. His time is up, and it's coming to an end. So therefore, behold, I've given you, because he's defeated, authority to tread on serpents over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. Jesus is saying, because the enemy is defeated, you have power that you didn't have before. You have protection you didn't have before. And all these things are good, and they're true of you, but nevertheless, do not rejoice in that fact. Don't rejoice in the fact that the spirits are subject to you, that you have power you didn't have before, but rather rejoice that your names are written in heaven. You're like, huh? Now, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are many references to this idea that our names are recorded in a book in heaven, okay? It's all over the place. It's in Daniel, it's in Ezekiel, right? It's in Philippians, but I'll give you two references, right, of it in the book of Revelation. Revelation 13:8. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. Chapter 20:15, this is the one that just gets to you. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he has thrown into the lake of fire. It's pretty simple. If your name's in the book, good. If your name's not in the book, that's bad. Period. It's as clear as it can be. If he flips it open and your name is in there, you're good. If he flips it open and it ain't, then no good. But here's what Jesus is really saying. Your name being written in the book has nothing to do with anything but one thing only. The person who can write in the book and whether he wrote your name in the book. That's it. That's all that really matters here. Your name isn't in the book because you're great. Your name isn't in the book because you are better. Your name is in the book because you have more power. None of that. Now let's go back to this bridge example to kind of illustrate what this means. Now you may have seen this in a gospel presentation. If you've ever been on missions, we probably taught you to do it like this, right? This is how what it is, and then we write the word sin in here, right? This is the gap that we can't, the chasm. And then we'll do this thing where we draw across That's how we get it. Now, that's not wrong. That's right. But here's what it's really illustrating beyond kind of, maybe it's a little corny to write it this way or to do it this way, but here's what it's basically saying. God did the work, period. Nothing that you and I did or could do or will do contributed to this act. And this is the only thing that allows us to be saved. And he did it. He defeated sin on this thing. And if that's what it means this. It means that salvation is simply a status change. That you go from not saved to saved. Not Christian to Christian. Not from bad to good. No. Status change. When we were in Canada, my family and I, this was when we only had one child, Mason, who's sitting here. Mason, as you know, I'm a U.S. citizen. My wife was a Canadian citizen. She's a U.S. citizen now. But in those days, Mason was about 3. And we had just gotten all of our passports, right, because we wanted to travel. And so Mason had gotten a U.S. passport because we were trying to go back to the States. I had a U.S. passport. My wife only had a Canadian passport. So Mason was looking through the passports one day, and then all of a sudden he looks at us, and he goes, Amma, Appa. And we're like, what? And he goes, Appa bird, Mason bird, Amma no bird. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, on the U.S. passport, I should have brought it, or I should picture it, there's a bald eagle. But the Canadian passport has no such thing. So, it's a maple leaf. I apologize to the Canadian. So he was like, how come I have a bird, Appa, you have a bird, how come Amma doesn't have a bird? Because she's not a citizen. But here's the thing, she's a bird now. And it doesn't matter how you got it, the point is you have one. That's why the Bible talks about an adoption, right? You were once orphan and now you're son or daughter, period. It doesn't matter how you got there, you're adopted. And once that's done, it's done. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is not new to many of you. You're like, I know this. Cool. But the critical question, more than knowing whether this is true or not, is, have you received it to be true? Have you come to accept and believe that this is not only true, but this is good? Now, let me explain what that means. I think though we know this is true, and we can explain this to people, in the heart of hearts, I don't think that most of us like this being true. You're like, what? Okay, follow me here. What this means is that who you are and your identity has nothing to do with what you can or cannot do. Put other ways, all of us, deep in our hearts, want to be known for what we can and cannot do, what we are good at. We want to be applauded. Our identity needs to be in what we are good at and what we can accomplish. I know we like to say, most of us are Asian in here, that we like free things. We actually don't like free things in the sense we don't like free passes. We don't. If you've ever had a friend that was born into like an amazing family and you think they had everything, what are you trying to do? You knock that person down. Why? Because they didn't earn nothing. They were just born into the situation. Or if you are like me, or the way I used to be, or most Asians, you know one thing we're really terrible at? We're terrible at receiving things. That's why your parents, or all of us, when we go out to a restaurant, that's why they fight to see who pays. And if someone pays for you, guess what you gotta do? You gotta pay them back. You have to. Absolutely have to. There's no other choice. The only way we might accept something is when we know that the person who's giving it to us has so much of that in excess that we're like, fine, if you give me one of those things, it's not gonna matter. You have so much hand sanitizer in your house, if you give me one, whatever, it's not gonna matter. But if you know that what that person has given you cost them something, you will fight tooth and nail to make sure they get it back. I mean, you may even know someone that's a good freeloader, but let's be real, do you like that person? No. Because you know why? Every self-respecting person, I'm not a freeloader, I earned what I got. Don't accuse me that everything I've been given is free. No, that's not how I roll. But with salvation in the gospel, bridging this chasm, That's the only way. Why? Because we're a sinful human being and this is a holy God, and the only way to bridge is what God does. You and I can do nothing about that. Nothing. Not a simple thing. And everything that we get, therefore, and all the blessing and all the life that we live is a result of having that free gift we received freely being lived out of us. The question is that how we want to be? I was invited to a wonderful gala yesterday put on by the Korean American Medical Association. Amazing. The board, it's literally like everyone from our church. It's pretty amazing. Amazing doctors all over the place in the room. All their bios are amazing. The one thing that I loved about the folks that were from our church, I'm pretty confident that I could look at them all and say, if you took out all the other titles, MD, DO, titles, I don't even know what they mean, they would not care as long as they didn't lose the one title that matters, Son of God or Child of God. I call all of our doctors by their first name. That's Chris over there. He does not get upset at me if I call him Chris and not Dr. Kwan. I know people in the world who would be very upset if you do not call them Dr. Kwan. Why? Because that's what I've earned. How dare you not call me by what I've earned? So what salvation is a free gift. That we cannot do anything, and yet we have everything. That what Jesus did on the cross, Satan's fall from heaven, was complete. He shed his blood, we were washed clean, and those who freely receive it, that we will not try to work for it, that our names are written in the book, and that's all that matters. We're at a Korean church, and I don't know if you know this, I've been here a long time. There are some youth students who call me by my name, Pete. The parents go crazy. What did you call him? He's 목사님. How dare? You know why I do it? Because it doesn't matter. That's not the point. It's a challenge to myself. Am I going to get offended when a 12-year-old calls me Pete? I know, we're Korean. That sounds really weird. I get it. So then lastly, how do we know then that we have this gift? Or how do we get it if we feel like maybe we don't? Now this is the difficult part, isn't it? Because again, we can know a lot of things. All this may even be things that you've already known, but to make it be a reality is the difficult part. So then how do we do it? The key is in one word. It's what Jesus says to them. He says, I know you just did amazing things, but he says, do not rejoice. And then he has a list, essentially, but he says, but rather rejoice in this. He makes a difference. Rejoice in this, but do not rejoice in this, right? The key is what we rejoice in and how we rejoice. In verse 21, right after he tells them, right, do not rejoice, right? He says, at that very time, Jesus then rejoiced greatly in the Holy Spirit and said, I praise you, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you've hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. Doesn't that statement kind of jog? Wait, what? What this is saying is Jesus, after his disciples do not get what in the world is going on, they make another mess of it, and Jesus tells them, hey, you're getting it wrong. He looks at the Holy Spirit and he says, he rejoices greatly, and he says, Father, I thank you greatly that they didn't get it. Now, I know our conception is that Jesus is someone who wants everyone to get it all the time, right? No matter what. You just get it, you get it, you get it, you get it. But throughout Scripture, you'll find and read that there are times where he does not reveal things, and he purposely conceals things for people so that they wouldn't go. He goes, yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight for them to not get it. Now, if you go back to chapter 9 and verse 44, right after he talks about his death and resurrection again, verse 45 says this, but they did not understand this statement. Why? Because it was concealed from them, that's God's doing, so that they would not perceive it. It's not their fault they didn't get it, that's God's doing. And they were afraid to ask him about this statement. They weren't allowed to understand what Jesus was talking about. Here, they weren't allowed to understand what God was doing and what Jesus was talking about. And not surprisingly, right after the section in chapter 9, they go about arguing who is the greatest. And then what Jesus does is he brings a little child. Again, Dan and Becky's kids were here, sitting in the back. I loved it. I kept doing this earlier about Rethink. One of them, the one that I love, I shouldn't play favorites, but he was doing this the whole time. And his brother was like, stop it, you're being a child. Now, Jesus then says, after all of this, after they don't understand, he goes, you're arguing about who wants to be the greatest? Okay, I'll show you what's going on. Then he brings a child next to him. So again, picture one of our little ones. And then he goes, if you do not receive this person, this little child, then you do not receive me. But if you do, you do. Now, what is Jesus getting at? The word to receive and the idea of receiving isn't just like, oh, I think this baby is cute, or I think this kid is cute. No. It's receiving this person into our group to add to the total compact impact of our group. Does that make sense? I'm going to take this little child and then bring this little child with me, and he's going to be part of my crew so that we can do our work better. Who thinks that's a good idea? Nobody. Children, they're cute. We love them. Kind of, sometimes, just kidding. We love them. But when you bring them into your fold to do the work that you want to do, they're not adding anything. They just make things worse. No one enjoys take your kid to work day except for the kid because they don't get to go to school. But the parent is not happy about it. Why? Because you're not going to be effective all day long, are you? They don't help you. Logistically, logically, it's not a good idea. But Jesus says, whoever receives this child into their fold receives me and therefore receives the Father. The disciples are trying to go around bring about God's kingdom. Part of their task is probably like trying to bring Rome down and doing all these things. A child is not going to be helpful, is he or she? Do you know that scene where Jesus is, kind of doing his thing, and then little children are coming up to him, and do you know what the disciples do? They go, stop. That's what we do. Stop. Don't mess with him. Stop. Go away. Go into your child's corner over there. And what does Jesus say? No. Let them come to me. To bring a child in like this is not smart, it's foolish. But now let's apply why Jesus says that to this idea of rejoicing, okay? Because it's critical. I have 3 children. A lot of us have children, okay? The way that you normally do things in life is you reward them for good and you punish them for bad, right? Am I the only one, right? Everyone does this. Let's say you got all your children and it's time to get them some dessert, some ice cream, or maybe it's gifts, whatever, okay? And so let's say, out of your children, let's say you have 3 children, one of them is not doing so hot, and the other one, they're doing well. Logically, you would give the 2 that are doing well the ice cream, and then you would give the one that's not doing well no ice cream, right? Discipline, teach them. But what would happen from the eyes of the kid who knows that he or she is not getting the ice cream or the gift if all of a sudden you as mom or dad said, go ahead, have it? You know what's not happening? I wonder why my dad and my mom is giving me this ice cream. Are they trying to trick me? Is there a secret? Are they going to make me do something afterwards? What in the world is going on? Why are they doing this? I don't deserve this. They're not doing that. If it was one of my kids, they would go, what? I get ice cream? Let's go. They would do this and they go right in for the ice cream. It's how it happens every single time. If you're super Korean, then you may think about for 30 seconds why this is happening, and then you would forget instantly. Why? Because you have beautiful ice cream in your midst. You would not care a hot second why you got it. It's not your job to care why you got it. If your parents gave it to you, that's all that matters, doesn't it? It's not your fault. What are they rejoicing in? The fact that they didn't deserve it and yet got it? No, they're not thinking that. They're rejoicing in the fact that they have ice cream, period. That's all that really matters. But you know what we would do in that situation? If it's in your workplace or in school or whatever, you'd be like, the first emotion through your mind is, you know what it is? It's suspicion. Why is this happening to me? Something is off. No, this is not supposed to be this way. I didn't earn this. No. A child who receives the gift undeserved is, if anything, more rejoiceful. We as adults or grown people, we are more suspicious. To the point some of us might even reject that offer. Or if we accept it, we do so reluctantly. But are any of us honestly doing so joyfully? Don't worry about the child. Children are great. You see, the disciples have been on this up and down journey. They don't rejoice throughout any of it except for the one time they do something right. Then they have a lot. Look, Jesus, look what I could do. That's who we are at the core, isn't it? But what Jesus is saying is very, very simple. You should always be rejoicing. Why? Because your name is in the book. That's reason to rejoice always. Because no matter what happens, no matter how you are, no matter how good you are or bad you are, and anything in between, your name is in the book. And once it's in the book, it don't change. It's the reason why you're saved, because Jesus died on the cross for you. And if you can receive it faithfully and humbly, then Jesus will write your name in the book and you are saved. It's something that children and infants all can do, but we cannot. Why? Because we're too wise and we're too intelligent. And here's the scary part. Let's say you do receive it like an infant does. But if you're not aware of this mindset, you will quickly turn it into about what you can and cannot do. It will happen in an instant, in a heartbeat. In another sermon I was listening to, the pastor gave an example of a woman who said she grew up with 5 identities. And this is kind of how her life works. And this, ask yourself, outside of the gender example, ask yourself if this feels like home. She said that when she was a little girl, she grew up in a conservative church. And so her whole life was about being moral, being good. And so her whole life was based on being good. And so she had her identity, and she thought she was a good person because she was a good child, good girl. And everyone loved her because she was a good girl, and so on and so forth, okay? But then, as many of us do, she became a teenager and then grew up a little bit and then had an interest in boys. So then she started getting into relationships. And then quickly she realized that what she wanted wasn't to be known as good. She was actually doing what the good girl would not do in dating. And then in doing so, she realized that her identity was now based on the affirmation and the love that the guy would give to her. And so what it did was, in the long run, was she would end up staying in relationships for too long. Good, bad ones, but she would stay. And so what happened, apparently, was that some of her girlfriends came along and said, hey, girl, you know what? You don't need a man to tell you how good you are or how beautiful you are. You are good on your own. You know what? What you need to go and get a job. Go get yourself accomplished, be an independent, strong woman. So then she went out and got an education and got a job and did really well for herself. And then her identity was based on that, how well she was doing. So she really busted her butt trying to be the best that she could in her workplace, all that kind of stuff. And then she realized it was never enough because there's always somebody better, always somebody higher. And so she was being burnt out and her life was kind of crumbling. And then someone came and goes, you know what? It's because you care too much about your work. You know what you need to do? You need to give. Our life is free when you give and you volunteer. You need to give your life to others. And so she dug right in and she started doing like prison ministries and all these different things, giving all the time, volunteering all of her time. But as you know, doing these things are very difficult. It's not easy. And so she eventually, because that's all she was based upon, started getting burnt out again, and then none of it was happening, and so she was there, and then in that place was when Jesus came and saved her and said, none of those things matter, you are my child. And then she finally realized that she could rest. It seems to me that with the disciples and what we do oftentimes is we base who we are on what we've done. And we don't like it that Jesus says, you've done nothing for my love. And you won't have it if you want to have something to do with it. I will give it to you freely. And so to me, the way that we know that we have this salvation for real, is knowing what we rejoice in. Let me give you an option for those of you who are accomplished, which is all of you. Take all of your titles and put them on one side. And then take the one title that matters, and that's Christ's son or daughter, adopted son or daughter. If you had the choice to lose one side, which is it? And be honest. The gospel says we cannot save ourselves, and we will not save ourselves, and only God's grace can save us. And everything else is what God gives to you. Please do not hear me wrong. One thing I love about this church and about who we are, we have so many wonderfully accomplished people. And so many of them that I know deeply, they love Jesus more than anything else. This is what salvation is. And yet the world tells us that what you are doing and what we need to do is to be based on your worth, and that will not cut it. And in the end, you'll realize that you might not have Christ. What are we rejoicing in? One pastor put it this way: if you have Christ, you rejoice always. And the reason why you can rejoice through all the difficulties in life is because all the difficulties in life are quite small in comparison to the one thing you have, which is salvation. And if you have that, you can indeed rejoice in all other things. So church, where are we putting our worth? What is the gospel to us? What are you rejoicing in? Parents and students in the room, what is it, the thing that's going to make you indeed sincerely most joyful and happy, feeling good about yourself? Is it the fact that God loves you? Or that you're trying to earn someone's love via whatever the methods are? The many professionals in the room, do we rejoice in the fact that we're God's child, first and foremost? And if we do, then we'll always be reminded who Christ is, and then we'll live this life the way that he asks us to, and then all the things will be a gift, a good gift. So church, would you then rejoice? Rejoice in the gift of salvation, the gift of grace, the gift of the cross. How well do we receive the free gift that Jesus gives to us? Who is then Jesus to us, but the person who saves us though we do not deserve? And I pray and I hope that we would be a church and a people who will always affirm others, not because of what they're good at or what they can do and accomplish, but because we are indeed children of God. So would you go before Christ this morning? Would you receive the grace, the gift of love and the gift of life? And in doing so, find that you are finally and totally free. And then have joy, a joy that lasts, because your names are written in the book of life, and that cannot change, period. Take some time to pray, and then we'll sing in song as the praise team leads us in response.